Shop the Sherwin-Williams July Summer Sale and get 30% off paints and stains July 18th through the 28th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking, they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. It had been a terrible 2 weeks. On Thursday, November 7th, 1974, after 2 days of testing, Karen Silkwood was again found to be contaminated by plutonium. That, in and of itself, may not have been all that surprising. Karen worked in the Cimarron nuclear facility, a division of Kerr-McGee, located in Crescent, Oklahoma. The company had a history of such, let's just call them accidents. The plutonium processing plant was located an hour outside of Oklahoma City, in a rural outpost where the Kerr-McGee jobs were considered good, especially if you were young and just out of high school. You didn't need to be a nuclear physicist. You were just doing what they taught you to do. Packing, unpacking, stacking, welding, rote work mostly. But it was okay pay, and a lot of people in town would have been glad to have the steady income. At her quality control job now for 4 years, Silkwood had recently stepped up to be a union rep because she cared about worker health and safety at the plant. She'd been doing some sleuthing in her efforts to get hard evidence that Kerr-McGee was less than diligent when it came to protecting its workers from life-threatening breaches. In recent days, she suspected the company was onto her. And now this. Both urine and fecal samples taken from her at the local hospital, at the behest of her bosses, showed that her nose, hands, arms, chest, back, and neck had been in contact with plutonium. What the hell? Had her hazmat suit been torn? Had her gloves been defective? From a KOCO5 news investigation.
There is no question that Karen was contaminated by plutonium while she was working at the Cimarron nuclear plant. She was contaminated 3 times, the last time in her own home.
It is determined that Karen's apartment has been contaminated, as well as her roommate, Sherry Ellis, and a gentleman friend.
That was the very thing she had been trying to expose, the very real danger that her employers had insisted to their employees, to their union leaders in Washington, D.C., and to federal regulators wasn't an issue. Scared now, and not just because of the exposure, but because she felt she was being watched and followed, she flew to Los Alamos, New Mexico for more tests and answered a lot of questions from lawyers while the company worked to decontaminate her home. They'd even found plutonium in her lunch meat. But she had not been deterred, and by Wednesday, November 13th, Karen put the proof of their negligence, all her handwritten notes and coworker testimonies, into a dark brown, legal-sized cardboard folder in her car as she drove from the Hub Cafe in Crescent to a prearranged hotel room. All so she could present her findings to 2 important people: the union official, a young lawyer named Steve Watka, who had asked her to gather it, and David Burnham, a reporter for the New York Times. They were waiting at the Holiday Inn Northwest in Oklahoma City. Her appointment was for 8 o'clock. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Cornbread. So I read this stat the other day that more people now consume cannabis than alcohol. And honestly, I get it.
Yeah, if I can unwind with something that doesn't wreck my sleep or leave me feeling awful the next day, that's a win.
Cornbread Hemp's THC seltzers have become my go-to for that. Just pop open a blueberry breeze or salted watermelon and boom, instant mood lift. Light, chill, and totally clear-headed.
I still think peach iced tea tastes like something you'd get on a fancy patio. It's got flavor, not funk.
They've really nailed it. Only 30 calories and 5 grams of sugar made with pure THC and all natural ingredients. No synthetics, no weird aftertaste.
And the 5 milligram per can is just right. You feel it, but you're not couch locked or spinning. It's just a better way to kick back.
Right now, Crimes of the Century's listeners can save 30% off their first order and enjoy free shipping on orders over $75. Head to cornbreadhemp.com/COTC and use code COTC at checkout.
That's cornbreadhemp.com/COTC, code COTC.
Cornbread Hemp, this is the good life.
So good.
Karen Silkwood was just 28 in 1974, but she had a lot of mileage behind her. She married at 19 and had children, Beverly, Michael, and Dawn, in quick succession. Her husband had driven them into bankruptcy and cheated on her with her best friend. And though no one really knew the specifics, she split one day in August 1972 and left the kids behind. Not long after, she started work at Kerr McGee. In 1974, the kids would have been 8, 6, and 4 years old. She had by then divorced William Meadows and agreed to the custody arrangement that left her children in their father's care. She had gone back to using her maiden name and set out to make a different life for herself. A smart, though relatively uneducated woman, she'd shown a capacity for science when she was in school and had been given the job at Kerr McGee plant to do random quality control checks on the plutonium pellets, parts of the cells for nuclear reactor fuel rods produced in the metallography lab. Not to get too fussy about this, but she was basically testing them to be sure that, 1, plutonium was evenly distributed throughout the pellets, and 2, there weren't any cracks in the pellets' fuel rod welds. She worked in what was called a glove box. You'd know it if you saw it. Homer Simpson is in one in every opening credit sequence of The Simpsons. Karen wore a full-body hazardous material suit and, while working, stuck her arms through already insulated gloves to work on plutonium pellets that were safely tucked into a transparent box. Plutonium is a man-made radioactive element, a byproduct of exposing uranium to neutrons. This was first done in the early 1940s and first used in nuclear weaponry, most specifically in the bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki in 1945. Post-war, it was experimentally being used as a fuel source for breeder nuclear reactors, such as the one in Hanover, Washington. Plutonium emits something called alpha particles, which, if inhaled, even in the tiniest amounts, can kill lung cells and exponentially increase the chances of lung disease and cancer. The substance can stay in the body for years, meaning that the body remains radioactive all that time. So yeah, this was work that required strict adherence to safety protocols and a whole litany of checks and rechecks daily to look for leakages at every step taken from any number of sites in the facility. As part of the quality control team, Silkwood observed practices that she knew to be compromising to the end product. She had already told Watka and the OCAW leadership in Washington, D.C., that Kerr McGee was passing welds that did not meet the lowest standard of acceptability. She had already told Watka and the union leadership in Washington, D.C., that Kerr McGee was passing welds that didn't meet the lowest standard of acceptability. She told them that she knew X-rays taken of the cracks on the rods were being touched up by felt-tip pens to appear to be more in line with requirements. She said she knew the government required that the fuel rod tubes were to be free of any surface welding or sanding, but that grinding of the rods regularly occurred at the plant to obscure the faults. Silkwood had been concerned but not alarmed about the implications of her job until she was leaving work on July 31st, 1974. This is when technicians noticed that filters from the room in which she had worked that day had shown a high level of contamination. Funny thing was, the room was used for 2 other shifts that day, one before and one after Silkwood's shift. And when checked, the filters showed no contamination. How to explain that? She knew that once the room was exposed, it would have stayed that way. If it happened on her shift, the next shift and its filter would have also been contaminated. Radiation doesn't clean itself up. No one ever found the source of the contamination, though Wayne Norwood, the plant's health physics director, seemed to think that the filter used during that Silkwood shift had been purposely swabbed or dabbed with plutonium. Who would do that, and why? It was at this point that Silkwood began to take an interest in being not just part of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers, OCAW, union, but agreed to serve as one of the 3 reps on site. It was the sloppiness and fudging of quality control measures she'd seen firsthand, and that weird filter result in late July, that prompted Silkwood and the 2 other union leaders to write OCAW headquarters in D.C. and complain mainly about the conditions there, noting that the high turnover at the plant meant that those who were handling the plutonium were untrained. OCAW's National Committee told the Cimarron facility trio that they needed to inform the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, about their concerns. Meanwhile, they advised that they start talking to those at the plant who could give specific details about these breaches. Alerted to the issues, OCAW invited Silkwood and her 2 union buddies to come to D.C. to sketch out what to do next. Then, in a surprise move, some of those who worked at the Cimarron plant asked for a vote to decertify the union before the next contract negotiations were set to begin. Now, holy crap. If successful, and it looked like it would be, this would derail any effort to get a fair look at the safety conditions there. So even the HQ folks agreed that the first order of business when the Cimarron union reps got to D.C. on September 26 was to begin strategizing how to save the union. Those in D.C. figured the best strategy was to start talking about the dangers of working with plutonium and decided to send doctors and specialists not affiliated with OCAW to the plant to give informational seminars. This would be very convincing to the workers of their need for union oversight. From author Richard Rashke in his book, The Killing of Karen Silkwood, quote, "When union activist Tony Mazzocchi described the danger, Silkwood became upset. She was bright, had had some college training, and had worked in the scientific laboratory with plutonium for 2 years. And no one at Kerr-McGee had ever told her the metal was carcinogenic. No one had ever taken an anatomical drawing, pointed to lungs or liver or lymph nodes or bones, and said that plutonium can cause cancer there in 25 or 30 years. It angered her, for she had been in a contaminated room without a respirator just 2 months before." End quote. The D.C. meeting's priorities then became first to defeat the decertification vote, and then to put pressure on Kerr-McGee through the AEC to address the quality control issues that affected products that were being passed along to contractors and, ultimately, to nuclear power plants, and to a public that understood even less than she did about the fuel. Here's Silkwood in a taped conversation with Watka.
I've got on here that we're still passing our wells, no matter what the pictures look like, no matter what the wells look like. We either grind down too far. And I've got a well I'd love for you to see now. Just how far they ground it down till we lost the well, trying to get rid of the voids, the inclusions, and the cracks. And I kept it.
The union bigwigs were impressed by her tenacity, but told her everything had to be firmly nailed down. Everyone would agree later when talking to the FBI that Silkwood had volunteered to do that dangerous work. Here's Watka.
We set the arrangements up for her to make this presentation to us on this quality control issue. And it was agreed that it would be on November 13th, 1974. And we had made arrangements with a reporter for the New York Times named David Burnham.
Burnham was no lightweight. He was the reporter who had toppled New York City's police department corruption with the help of his inside source, Frank Serpico. He was looking into the nuclear power industry when his name was brought to Silkwood's attention. A small aside, a full disclosure kind, no victim in any crime is ever perfect. Karen Silkwood was no exception. But as events unfolded in the coming 2 months, her personal life and habits came under scrutiny and certainly complicated and may have undermined her larger purpose. So to save time, I'll just enumerate those things. She smoked pot and took a lot of Quaaludes, a sedative hypnotic drug. She lived on and off with her boyfriend and co-worker, Drew Stevens, and she began to sleep as well with attorney Watka on occasion. You already know she left her children to be raised by a man she had told others she'd been forced to escape from. None of this negates her motives, but it does remind us that anyone can be a whistleblower. It doesn't take Superman or Wonder Woman to want justice. The decertification vote was set for October 13th, so, per the plan, in early October, nationally recognized experts on the effects of plutonium contamination came to rural Oklahoma and scared the bejesus out of the workers, who then voted to keep the union. Silkwood was diligently watching every aspect of plant operation now, taking notes in an 8.5 by 11-inch red spiral notebook that she always had on her. She and Watka talked frequently about her concerns and her progress. As a matter of protocol, Watka taped all of his conversations with Silkwood. This is her trying to explain why she was taking the risks she knew she was now taking.
In the laboratory, we've got 18 and 19-year-old boys, and 20 and 21. And they didn't have the schooling, so they don't understand what radiation is.
In other words, she didn't want their eventual cancer diagnoses on her conscience. On October 31st, Karen Silkwood was involved in a minor single car crash in her white Honda. She said she was swerving to avoid hitting a cow on her way home from work, only to find herself spinning around and crashing against a fence post. She took the car in for the $300 of bodywork needed on the right side of the car. There was no damage to the left side. These things happen. Less than a week later, these things would get weird. This is National Public Radio's Barbara Newman reporting in April 1975.
On 3 successive days, November 5th, 6th, and 7th, portions of her skin were found to have plutonium contamination. This was especially confusing, as she apparently left the plant uncontaminated, yet returned the following days contaminated. In addition, an analysis of her fecal matter revealed that she had somehow ingested plutonium.
Those 3 days would be revisited repeatedly in years to come as police, the FBI, the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, journalists, and lawyers would try to unravel what really happened. On November 5th, during a break, Karen tested herself for contamination and was found clean. An hour or so later, she did it again and got some clicks, indicating she had been exposed. The health physics office was called and found contamination on her left hand, right wrist and upper arm, neck, face, and hair. Checking her nasal cavity, they found evidence she'd inhaled some alpha particles from insoluble plutonium, the kind that did not respond to the chelating agent that could be used to neutralize the effects. 2 gloves in her glove box were also found contaminated, but showed no signs of any leakage. And that was weird. She washed with Clorox and Tide and checked out of work that day as, quote-unquote, clean. The source of the radiation couldn't be located. The next day, contract negotiations with the company were set to begin. Staying inside the facility, but only in conference rooms, she again checked herself for contamination and found that her right forearm was eliciting a lot of clicks. Washing again did not change her status. It had to be in her pores. On the 7th, she went back to work and, as expected, was checked for plutonium exposure. Her nose, ears, hands, arms, chest, and neck again came back hot, though nothing in her car, locker, or in the lunchroom showed any sign of exposure. It was time to check her apartment. There, not only did the kitchen light up like Christmas, an analysis of the contents of her refrigerator found that both bread and bologna, both wrapped inside the fridge, were contaminated, but there were also significant levels of the element in the bathroom. Roommate Sherry Ellis had positive readings on her buttocks and hands. Drew Stevens also showed signs of contamination. Karen's only response was that she had spilled fresh urine for her urine sample in the bathroom. Could that have been it? Problem was, the plutonium present was also shown to be the insoluble, thus not dissolvable in blood type, so it had no way to get into the kidneys to be excreted in urine. What the hell did that mean? Did the company, knowing what she was doing, intentionally set out to discredit her by suggesting that she was manufacturing evidence of her own contamination? Or had she, in fact, contaminated herself, ingesting plutonium to prove a point? In either case, whoever sprinkled plutonium into her urine had not understood the difference between soluble and insoluble plutonium. Later, when it became of national importance to unravel what happened to Karen, the Atomic Energy Commission weighed in. From NPR.
The final Atomic Energy Commission report on the contamination of Karen Silkwood found that not 2, but 4 of her urine samples were found to be doctored. This means that plutonium was added to them after excretion by Silkwood. No answers as to who, when, how, where, or even why plutonium was added to these samples. But there are theories. First is that Silkwood doctored her own samples in order to discredit Kerr-McGee by showing that work conditions were unsafe and could lead to worker contamination. Those who follow this theory hold that Silkwood's contamination could have resulted inadvertently from an accident when she doctored her own samples. The second theory is that Kerr-McGee doctored her samples in order to discredit her. She was, after all, an agitating union member. The third theory is that somebody involved in quality control falsification doctored Silkwood samples in order to discredit her or to have her moved out of the quality control laboratory. The samples were, after all, seemingly accessible on a shelf at the Kerr-McGee plant. While the Atomic Energy Commission found that Karen Silkwood's apartment was contaminated, it never did ascertain how or by whom.
But that was later. What everyone needed to know in early November 1974 was how bad this was. Was Karen going to live to see 30? It was quickly decided to send the 3 roommates to Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, where the world's most sensitive and sophisticated equipment could detect just exactly how hot Karen, Drew, and Sherry were. Surprisingly, maybe, Silkwood's readings were lower than her urine and fecal kits had suggested. She had something like 8 nanocuries of plutonium in her lungs. The maximum lung burden, according to the AEC, was 16. Both Ellis and Stevens had insignificant amounts of plutonium present, per their scans. Silkwood wanted to talk to Dr. George Volz, a physician there who had a great deal of knowledge about plutonium and its occupational hazards. She asked to see him alone. She wanted to know if her genes would be affected, should she ever wish to have more children. He assured her on that score. But there was more he didn't say. Volz believed the AEC limits to be safe. What he did not say was this was by no means a unanimous view. Dr. John Goffman, the doctor who had been on Robert Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project team, thought the SEC allowable amount should be reduced 8 times, which meant Goffman would have considered Silkwood already way over the limit. Other experts, according to author Raschke, wanted limits, quote, lowered by 100 to 1,000 times because they believed that the AEC limits were based on incomplete, unreliable data from small samples, end quote. Raschke also wrote that Volz had not taken Silkwood's history into account. She was a heavy smoker, was asthmatic, and weighed less than 100 pounds. And remember, the plutonium she had been contaminated with was insoluble. all factors which meant that Silkwood's cancer risk was significantly increased. Sometime during these 2 weeks, Silkwood and Wodka spoke on the phone.
But the whole point is that plutonium is so carcinogenic, is so potent, that it's now figured that, under the conditions that you work under in that kind of a plant, you don't have to work there for 5 years. You might only have to work there for 1 friggin' month, and you've got enough of a body burden to cause cancer.
Oh, Steve, don't tell me that.
The threesome got back from New Mexico the night of November 12th. Wodka had assumed the next day's meeting with a reporter was off. Silkwood wouldn't hear of it. She still planned to see him the next day at the hotel. Silkwood's job on the morning of November 13th was to report to the bargaining session that the local was having with Kerr McGee in the Cimarron facility's conference room. The topic that morning was health and safety. Neither side budged on their demands nor made any offer to mediate the issue. The company maintained it could not raise salaries or upgrade safety conditions. Interested union members met at 5:30 that evening at the Hub Cafe to hear how things had gone. As Raschke reported in his book, 1974 had been a damn fine year for Kerr McGee with a net income of $116.5 million. That'd be close to $750 million in today's money. And while that sounded like a whopping enterprise that could afford to pay workers more, the company insisted that the plutonium rod division was losing $7.2 million a year. People grumbled. Silkwood drank iced tea and kept glancing at the large stack of papers in front of her that she held tight in that cardboard folder. Some of those present would later say that they thought they saw photographs mixed in with the documents she held. Silkwood stepped out once to remind boyfriend Drew Stevens to pick up Wodka and the reporter from the airport and take them to the hotel. In later testimony, those there at the Hub that night would say Silkwood looked depressed and a tad nervous. She'd had a harrowing few weeks. She had pulled one friend aside to confide how scared she was about everything she'd heard in recent days about contamination and cancer risk. A few friends offered to drive her home, but she declined. She had somewhere else to be. She had just put new tires on her car for better traction. Her Honda had front-wheel drive. She left the cafe a little after 7. The hour-long trip should put her at the hotel a tad late, but she knew Wodka and the reporter would wait. She took Highway 74 and drove past the plant, heading almost due south. She was going 55 miles per hour. What happened around 7:30 that night on that dry patch of asphalt would be debated in courtrooms and congressional hearings, in newspapers, magazines, television, and radio for years to come. At its most basic, it was a one-car accident that ended with a non-braking slide across a football field-length stretch of road in the dark, ending with a hard slam into a concrete culvert and the death of Karen Silkwood. At its best, though, it would make America ask itself some serious questions about nuclear power, about corporate accountability, and the need to protect whistleblowers who believe we should all know what they know. At its worst, it was murder. When Steve Wodka got to the hotel with the New York Times reporter in tow, the front desk told him that his reservation had been canceled. That was odd. He traveled a lot, always stayed at a Holiday Inn. This had never happened. Strange. He booked a room anew. He figured Karen would be late, she usually was, but what was concern became alarm at about 10 p.m. When he tried to make an outgoing call to the cafe to see if the meeting there was still occupying her, the room's phone was dead. At the front desk, no one could find a problem with the phone, so he returned and was able to call Jack Tice, one of Karen's union rep buddies, to see what he knew. Tice told Wodka that there was an accident near the plant and, after some calling around, he had talked to Ted Sebring, the local record driver who had towed Karen's car back to his facility, and to the Crescent Police Department's dispatcher. After Watka explained that he thought the people at the hospital where Karen had been taken should know that she had recently been contaminated by radioactive material, the dispatcher told him that a highway patrolman had found the car and that Karen had not survived. That night, Watka, reporter Burnham, and a distraught Drew Stevens went to the crash site. No one was there. They couldn't find any evidence of skid marks on the road, nor anything much in the mud where her car had come to rest. Oklahoma State Trooper Rick Fagan was put in charge of the investigation. The next morning, he visited the site, measured the distance she had traveled in the grass, but took no pictures. He went to the plant and spoke to some of those who'd been at the Hub Cafe that night. It would be later that a few unusual things that happened that night after the 7:30 crash were revealed. Firstly, the ambulance and wreckers that were dispatched to the scene were well on their way there when they were all called and told to go back home. So they did. Next, the security guards at Kerr-McGee were, for the most part, off-duty or former Oklahoma City police officers, and there's some evidence they were on the scene early on. Lastly, one police officer would report that some papers that had been thrown into the ditch where the car rested were gathered by the highway patrol at the scene and thrown back into the car. All the papers later found inside the car showed no sign of having been in the mud or grass that surrounded the vehicle, which had come to a halt turned onto the driver's side. In short order, without the autopsy being completed and without forensics ruling that her thermos contained only tomato juice, Fagan determined the cause. Here's Watka again.
And he said, yes, she fell asleep at the wheel. And we said, wait a minute, she couldn't have fallen asleep at the wheel. She had just gotten on the road a few minutes earlier. And Mr. Fagan, you don't understand, she was on her way to a very important meeting. It was not the kind of thing you would just fall asleep on the way to. And I'll never forget this. Fagan says to us, I'm going to treat it as a falling asleep at the wheel case unless you can prove something different.
No one would ever produce any proof that Silkwood had had anything stronger than iced tea that night. Witnesses, who did note that she looked tired and nervous, never once used the word sleepy to describe her. Watka and Stevens, highly suspicious that something had happened, went to wrecker driver Sebring's garage and, after getting Karen's father's permission, were allowed to search the car. They found the collective bargaining negotiation notes she'd had with her still on the back seat. They found some personal effects. Missing was anything that had to do with quality control issues at the plant. They also found no trace of the cardboard folder or Karen's ubiquitous red spiral-bound notebook inside. Later, Ted Sebring explained to KOCO that he'd been awakened in the early morning of November 14th by three men who claimed to be from the Atomic Energy Commission. They said they were there to check the car for evidence of contamination. One of the three men was, in fact, from Kerr-McGee. But Watka and Stevens wouldn't know that for a while. Without this information, they decided to have the car towed to a separate location so they could control access to it and do a more complete examination of it, which, it's worth noting, is something the Highway Patrol hadn't seemed interested in doing. The National Union immediately decided to employ an independent accident reconstruction expert to do what the authorities would not. A.O. Pipkin flew in from Dallas and spent 2 days at the crash site and with the car. This is Pipkin speaking with NPR in 1975.
It's my opinion that there's enough circumstantial evidence present to indicate that V1, which is Miss Silkwood's car, was struck from the rear by an unknown vehicle causing it to go out of control due to either the initial impact or the combined impact and driver overreaction. I do not believe that the accident was caused by Karen Silkwood falling asleep at the wheel and the car just going off the road by itself.
Specifically, he found, 1, there was a deep dent on the left side of the Honda below the bumper that Ted Sebring testified was not caused by the removal of the car from the ditch. This was also verified by the people who had done the very recent body work from that other accident, the one that dented the right side. Those body shop workers said the left side dent hadn't previously existed. Pipkin attributed it to the vehicle being hit from behind and pushing or pulling the car across the highway. 2. The visible torquing of the steering wheel showed that Silkwood had been alert and trying to correct the direction of the car even as she was being pushed in another direction. If she had been asleep at the wheel, her arms would have been lax. 3. Furthermore, if she'd been asleep, the natural curvature of the land and the road would have altered her path significantly. For one thing, almost all impaired or sleeping drivers in one-car accidents go off the right side of the road. It would be especially true in this case because the culvert was on an upslope. For another, the grass she turned up along that left side was evidence that she was violently out of control when she left the road. Pipkin again.
If she had just drove off the left side of the road, either dozing or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, without any control over the car would have never reached the concrete culvert in the first place. It went on further to the east of the road and out to a pasture.
Lastly, number 4. Analysis of the scrapings on the side of the car, which the Highway Patrol had decided were caused by the concrete culvert, in fact showed that no concrete was embedded in those scraps. That work was done by a metallurgist hired by Pipkin. The FBI's own analysis confirmed the absence of any concrete in the scraps. Pipkin also maintained that there were metal fragments, possibly from another vehicle, present. And he said that both he and an engineer verified that the scraps were going in the wrong direction from how the culvert would have made contact with the car. While Pipkin's work was being done and some conclusions could already be drawn, reporter Burnham wrote a story that explained that the OCAW had sent a telegram to U.S. Attorney General William Saxby demanding an investigation. This was the first time Karen Silkwood's story had been written for a national audience. When Pipkin's 37-page report went public a month later, the one-car crash on a rural highway in middle-of-nowhere America started to loom large. The hammer fell first on the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. Larry Owen, the patrol's chief accident specialist, took charge of a reinvestigation. It looked a lot like the first investigation.
From the standpoint of physical evidence, there's nothing to indicate there was ever a second vehicle involved in the accident. The theory of how she ran off the road could have been induced just as easily or could have been substantiated just as easily if she had just simply fallen asleep from fatigue. That's been substantiated by 2 witnesses we talked to. She was in no condition to drive the car when she left the restroom.
NPR reporter Barbara Newman checked that statement against those made by eyewitnesses. Gerald Brewer and Gene Young, 2 of those cited by the Highway Patrol as confirming their hypothesis, insisted they never said such a thing.
To me, she was alert, to drive. She could talk plain, she could walk straight.
Owen further stated that the car drifted left instead of right because it was not aligned, something for which he had no proof, as the Highway Department still had not examined the car. It also seems unlikely, as she had just gotten new tires. Dr. A.J. Chapman, the medical examiner for the state of Oklahoma, concluded that Silkwood had evidence of Quaalude in her blood, hence impairing her. The amount given was 0.35 milligrams, which, according to various other pharmaceutical experts, was less than the sedative's therapeutic dose and would not have hampered her driving. In January 1975, the AEC opened its own investigation into the safety violations that Silkwood had alleged. It found only 3 violations. 4 months later, the Justice Department announced that her car accident showed no evidence of foul play. But nothing quieted the suspicion. In August 1975, the National Organization for Women asked for another Justice Department to look into the case. Climbing on board, evoking her name soon enough, were the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Emergency Civil Liberties Foundation, the Environmental Policy Center, the Unitarian Church, and Jesuit priests. In December 1975, the Cimarron plant in Crescent, Oklahoma was closed by Kerr McGee. the company reported that 90 pounds of plutonium had gone missing from its stock. One pellet had even shown up as a show-and-tell item at a local school. In 1979, Bill and Merle Silkwood, Karen's parents, filed a lawsuit against Kerr McGee. The case took 3 years to come to trial, plenty of time for the nation to be increasingly energized about the issue of the safety, indeed the use at all, of nuclear power. A federal district court jury awarded the family $11.5 million, but that wasn't the end of it. In 1984, in a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court upheld a lower court decision that the federal law did not bar the $10 million punitive damages won by the Silkwood estate in a negligence suit against the Kerr McGee Company. The decision did not ensure the Silkwoods would get $10 million. It simply returned the case to the 10th Circuit for further proceedings. In the end, the family settled for $1.38 million. Despite continued efforts, the union was never able to prove that Silkwood had been forced off the road. That made no difference to a lot of people. As Richard Lyons of the New York Times wrote in 1979, Karen was claimed by those who were decidedly anti-nuke as, quote, the first person to die through the carelessness of the nuclear power industry, end quote. In 1979, Kerr McGee sold its uranium division to concentrate, it said, on its petroleum and chemical divisions. In 1983, Meryl Streep, Cher, and Kurt Russell starred in Silkwood, a movie directed by Mike Nichols and written by Nora Ephron and Alice Arlen. It received Academy Award nominations for Streep and Cher and, again, brought attention to the story. After a brief buzz, Silkwood's case lost some momentum until just last year, the 50th anniversary of her death. The Oklahoma City TV station KOCO put reporters Bob Sands and Mike Betcher back on the Silkwood beat, if only to look back. They combed records and re-interviewed anyone who was still alive, which didn't leave many of the principals to chat with. Sherry Ellis had died of cancer at 59 in 2012. Drew Stevens had died in a small plane crash in 1995. They did find Larry Dellinger, a longtime Oklahoma highway patrolman who was a young officer in 1974.
That young lady was murdered as far as I'm concerned. They run her off the road. Killed her.
Seems that he was told by an attorney that a former Oklahoma City policeman and 3 off-duty police officers worked for Kerr McGee for extra cash. It was not at all unusual during the fall of 1974 for them to follow Silkwood when she left the plant, as they were told by management there that they suspected she was stealing plutonium. They also allegedly confessed to searching her home and wiretapping her phones. The night of her death, said Dellinger, a foursome was tailing her. They had been drinking, he said, and they just decided to give her a little scare.
They bumped her, knocked her off the road, probably with no intentions necessarily of killing her, but she runs off the road and hits this big concrete abutment and kills her instantly.
He said the troopers were afraid every day of their lives that they were going to be arrested for her murder. Dellinger named the 4 and took those names to the FBI, but they're all dead now. Sands and Betcher made inquiries to the FBI and other state agencies and got no reply. A decade after her death, the New York Times reported that, quote, government inquiries after Silkwood's unexplained death in 1974 confirmed irregularities in rod manufacture by Kerr McGee, as well as the retouching of weld x-rays. Some experts warned in the late 1970s that it could be hazardous to use the Kerr McGee welds, end quote. The story, not written by David Burnham, goes on to say that the pencil-thin 8-foot rods were put into the world's most advanced reactor located in the Rattlesnake Hills of Hanover, Washington, that they have been repeatedly heated to 4,000 degrees and bombarded with subatomic particles. Quote, Officials here say the rods have posed no hazard and have often exceeded contraction specifications for use life and power productions, end quote. Burnham, who died last year at the age of 91, was known to have spent a lot of time in Oklahoma trying to nail down what happened there. He wrote about this in 1984 after the Silkwood movie came out to explain why he didn't want screenwriters to use his name in the film. He wrote, quote, "Did she really have incriminating evidence concerning Kerr McGee and her car? Was it removed by Kerr McGee investigators? What was the explanation for the incident in which she was contaminated 1 week before her death? Were the prescription drugs found in her blood at autopsy sufficient to put her to sleep only a few minutes after leaving an intense meeting of the local union? Was there some particular individual who, for personal or organizational reasons, might have wanted to kill Karen Silkwood?" End quote. He looked at all the possibilities and, because he was a good reporter, noted that cement culverts, like the one she collided so violently with, are a rarity on the highways of Oklahoma, and he figured the considerable distance her car traveled, based on the visible skid marks, made it virtually impossible for anyone to plan her murder in that way. He wrote, quote, "Though it is possible that some unknown person, for some unknown reason, set out to give her a scare, and that this attempt then went awry, the evidence indicates that no board of governors or individuals opposed to her union activities or anyone else made a deliberate decision to kill her before she reached Oklahoma City. It is possible that someone set out to harass her and that this attempt led to her death. It, of course, also remains a possibility that she simply fell asleep." End quote. That, of course, doesn't explain a lot of things, like the documents missing from her vehicle, which suggests that even in the least damning scenario possible, there was still a cover-up committed, which, as the saying goes, is sometimes worse than any crime. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read The Killing of Karen Silkwood by Richard Roschke and saw numerous documentaries produced both at the time of her death and much later. The NPR 6-part series in 1975 proved helpful, as did a careful reading of the reporting on Silkwood done by the New York Times over the past 50 years. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this show was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com.